1920s, there was a significant shift in the practices of midwifery towards the medical model. As science and medicine evolved, there was a shift towards medical interventions and hospital births, making the process more focused on medical care. Doctors would do most of the work, but this has some drawbacks. Some drawbacks would be that it could lead to a more impersonal and less individual approach to the birthing process. The practice of managing drugs such as twilight sleep was really dangerous back then. There were many drugs which caused women in labor to enter a state of sleep prior to giving birth, and then women would wake up remembering nothing of the procedure. They would use drugs like morphine, and it would be given to them by an injection. So they thought they were making things easier, but in reality they were making things worse. When forceps are used, there is a potential risk of injury to both mother and the baby. For the mother, forceps can cause tears in the birth canal or perineum or even the bladder. These injuries can be painful and may require stitches or further medical intervention. So why did it stop? Slowly, the use of twilight sleep began to disappear in the United States after a huge amount of complications. Some of the common issues included prolonged labor, increased risk of infection, respiratory problems for both the mother and the baby, and even maternal deaths in some cases. These complications, along with growing concerns about the safety and effectiveness of the method, led to its decline in the United States. Medical professionals and researchers started exploring alternative pain management techniques that were safer and more reliable. During birth, it resulted in dangerous outcomes for both mothers and babies. Mothers were semi-conscious or unconscious during childbirth, and this practice often led to confusion and disorientation upon waking up, making it difficult to bond with their newborns. In the 1970s, obstetricians had some important changes happening. They started to think about what women wanted and gave them more choices for what they wanted to give birth. They also used more technology to monitor the baby's health during childbirth. It was a time when doctors started to see childbirth as a personal and unique experience for each woman. They started to incorporate some of the midwifery models. However, this medicalization also came with some challenges. Without access to the advanced technologies and interventions available today, maternal death rates were higher due to complications during childbirth. Maternal mortality rates were highest in the century during 1900s to 1930s because there were poor obstetric education and delivery practices. They were mainly responsible for the high numbers of maternal deaths, which most were preventable. When midwifery became more medicalized, there were some challenges. Unlike today, advanced technologies and interventions were not available back then. This meant that managing complications during childbirth was more difficult, leading to higher maternal death rates. Without the same level of medical resources and knowledge, midwives faced unique hurdles in providing safe and effective care. We begin to move on to current midwifery practices, and it focuses on giving women personalized and caring support during childbirth, helping them make important decisions and creating a nurturing environment for a natural birth. Hospital births means having a baby in a hospital with doctors and nurses nearby to take care of you and your baby. It's a safe place to give birth because if there are any problems or emergencies, the doctors and nurses can help right away. They have all the tools and equipment needed to make sure that you and your baby are healthy and well taken care of. Building a trusting relationship between the midwife and the mother is really important because it helps create a safe and supportive environment for the mother's childbirth journey. When there is trust, the woman feels more comfortable sharing her concerns, fears, and preferences with the midwife. This allows the midwife to provide personalized care and support that aligns with the woman's needs and values. This video shows a day in the life of a midwife, giving us a glimpse into their important work and well-being a midwife is all about.
What brings me joy is watching women find themselves. So through that pregnancy journey, it's about building a trust and an intuition, really discovering themselves in pregnancy, learning about their baby as it grows and developing. And in that birth scenario with women in labour, it's them finding their courage sometimes, going to the real depth of themselves to find that strength and step into motherhood being strong. Our program here at UniSC prepares students for practice through, I think, fostering a really solid foundational knowledge and deep respect for normal physiology. We also layer that by scaffolding more complex understanding around areas of midwifery and obstetric care. Students have got the access to a great midwifery lab where they're able What brings me joy is...
Okay. Midwives have to follow strict rules and procedures. They needed proper training and certification to practice. There are specific guidelines for taking care of pregnant women before, during, and after childbirth. These rules were put in place to make sure that midwives provided safe and effective care. They would do things like conducting regular checkups during pregnancy to monitor the health of the mother and the baby. They would also provide guidance on proper nutrition and exercise to ensure a healthy pregnancy. During labor and delivery, midwives would assist with the birthing process, providing support and guidance to the mother. After childbirth, they would offer postnatal care, including monitoring the mother's recovery and providing guidance on newborn care. Midwives had to follow guidelines to ensure safe and effective care for expectant mothers. Some of these rules included obtaining proper training and certification, adhering to specific protocols for prenatal care, labor and delivery, and postnatal care, and maintaining accurate records of their patients. These rules were put in place to prioritize the health and well-being of both the mother and the baby during childbirth. Midwives have improved from the past to now by incorporating advancements in medical knowledge and technology into their practices. They receive formal education and training, which enhances their skills and understanding of childbirth. This allows them to provide more comprehensive care to women throughout their reproductive journey. Additionally, midwives now work collaboratively with other healthcare providers to ensure the best outcomes of women and their babies. Overall, the improvement in midwifery have been driven by combination of experience, education, and the integration of modern medical practices. Modern midwives are healthcare professionals who specialize in taking care of pregnant women and helping them have babies. They provide personalized care and support throughout the pregnancy, during labor, and even after the baby is born. Midwifery has come a long way and is now a valuable part of modern healthcare systems. There are different types of midwives, like certified nurse midwives, direct entry midwives, and traditional midwives. They all have their own unique ways of practicing. Midwives are great because they focus on building a strong relationship with their clients and making sure they feel empowered and supported throughout their pregnancy journey. Nowadays, midwifery is increasingly recognized as a safe and effective option for childbirth. It's great to see more people embracing midwifery as a holistic approach to pregnancy and childbirth. The Kaiser model is a healthcare system that puts mothers in charge of their care, while also making sure doctors are there to provide expert medical care. It's about giving mothers the power to make decisions and giving the right care when they need it. Kaiser offers a range of options to expectant mothers including midwives and obstetricians, and encourages shared medical decision-making. This model allows women to have a choice in their care provider and to be active participants in their own healthcare decisions. At the same time, Kaiser provides access to high-quality medical interventions and technologies, making sure that the women receive appropriate medical care when necessary. This collaborative approach ensures a balance between personalized and medically necessary care. What are the pros and cons of having a midwife? Some pros would be that midwives take more individual care, taking into account your unique needs, preferences, and values. They focus on building a trusting relationship with you throughout your pregnancy and childbirth journey. With a midwife, you can often have the same healthcare provider throughout your pregnancy, labor, and postpartum period. This care can make you feel a sense of familiarity and comfort. Some cons would be that midwives generally focus on low-risk pregnancies and natural births. If you have a high-risk pregnancy or complications arise during labor, you may require additional medical interventions that a midwife may not be able to provide. I'm going to interview Jessica Salan later today. She is a labor and delivery and travel nurse, and she is going to tell me everything I need to know in order to go into the health field career that I want to go into. For my career plan, I plan on attending nursing school to get my RN. After that, I will go into labor and delivery school to specialize in caring for expectant mothers during childbirth and gain some experience on how it's like working with mothers and babies. And finally, I'll go into midwifery school to become a certified midwife. After high school, my plan is to attend one of these 4 universities and continue my education. And here's my work cited. And yeah, that's it.
Before we switch over to Diego's presentations, if anybody has a question for Heidi, feel free to ask her.
Yeah.
What did you learn from researching midwifery?
I learned that it's really, really hard. It's a really hard job, but it's not impossible, and I know I can do it, you know? Yeah.
What gave you interest to talk about midwifery?
Well, it was always something that I wanted to get into after high school, and I'm like, oh, let me do my presentation on this to gain more access to information that I need to know. And it's something that really sparks my interest because working with mothers and babies is really interesting to me. Yeah.
4 years for college and then another couple of years. How long is the whole track?
Probably 6, 7 years if you really want to go into the top, the highest level. Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm fine.
And I messed up the sound for the first couple seconds. Do you want to do it again?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Put these right here.
All right, great job, Heidi.
You would never okay, so you switch up. Yeah. Okay, so put it on the first slide, which is, yeah. And then, there you go. Oh, just in time. Okay. All right, you guys, I think we're going to need
I was just wondering, from what class
Maybe Mr. Brown's.
Let's see. Mr. Warren. It's for.
I like the background. Here we go.
Yeah. This is marriage. That's very expensive. Then she has mom in the back.
Wait for the chairs to come in before you go, so just stay up on that one, but you can adjust that to how you want it. There we go. Let's get this bread, let's get this cash money. Thank you, Ashley.
Okay, our second presentation will begin now with Diego Murdia.
Mine is on the colonization of the Mono Basin and its consequences. Though our community seems to be in the middle of nowhere, the Mono Basin holds the stories of many of our people. From the Kutsarika to the first settlers to the diversions of LADWP to immigrant families, the Mono Basin holds the memories of the people before us and the negative effects of colonization on the Mono Basin. Long before the settlers, the Kutsarika lived in the Mono Basin for ages. We've named our lake, basin, and county after their word mono, which translates to beautiful in their language. Their name is derived from the word gutsabe, or alkali fly, in their language. The story of Mono Lake goes back ages. It is said that a giant fish would jump across lakes, creating an abundance of fish in each one it came across. And once inside Mono Lake, the Kutsarika people attempted to fence it in, yet it escaped, and the scales that fell off of the fish and fell into the lake became brine shrimp. Angered by their attempt to fence it in, it promised no fish for the Kutsarika people, but left behind alkali flies in its place. The Kutsarika diet consisted of elderberries, jackrabbits, antelope, Pandora moth larvae, alkali flies, and cottontails, just to name a few. There was two tribes that the Kutsarika people interacted with in their time. One was the Miwok. They traded with them basket-making materials, obsidian, and acorns. They lived across the Sierra Nevadas. Another more prominent tribe was the Awani people. These people lived in the Yosemite Valley before colonizers and settlers made their way through the valley. In their escape, they made it to the Mono Basin, befriending the Kutsarika people. There, they formed friendship and an alliance. However, this alliance broke down as one night the Awani people stole many of the goods from the Kutsarika and fled. Yet the Kutsarika managed to catch up with them in what is now known as Bloody Canyon, where the Awani were nearly wiped out by the Kutsarika. Now shifting, we arrive to our settlement period, where our first notable white person or colonizer to make it to the Mono Basin was Lieutenant Treadwell Moore. He was a Mexican-American war veteran and a Union soldier in the Civil War. He and his soldiers in the 2nd Infantry began pushing tribes off of the Yosemite Valley. His main target was the Awani chief Tenaya, who he pursued heavily through Yosemite Valley, yet he was never able to capture him. But he did find remnants of gold around the Mono Basin, which led to a minor boom in gold. While no picture exists of Leroy Vining, he is still a very important figure in our history. He, along with his brother Dick, came from Indiana They both fought in the Mexican-American War, and both found themselves in Sonoma, where they had found themselves in the Holden Garden riot, which one man perished. After this, Vining's brother decided to part ways with him, traveling in who knows where. We have no record of what happened to his brother, but we do know what happened with Leroy, as he had gotten word that gold had been found in the Mono Basin by Lieutenant Moore. He made his way to the Mono Basin, where he decided to establish a saloon in Monoville. Business was great until one day, not tragic day, but a heavy snowstorm came across Monoville. And in the ensuing storm, his roof collapsed in the saloon. Rather than fixing it, he decided to sell his business instead, buying a sawmill, marrying a Paiute woman, and moving down to the base of Tioga Pass. While the date of his death is widely disputed, it is often regarded that he passed away around the 1860s, most notably in 1863. One of the most important figures in our history is Chris Matley, who came here in the early 1900s at the age of 12. He arrived with all of his family, who established ranches all along the Mono Basin. His family business consisted of obtaining Mono salts, which were the Mono Lake salts, and selling them back down in Los Angeles. He's often credited with being our founder of the town, as he bought the lots from the Andersons for around $4,000. He was the one who sold lots to many of the first residents of this area, who then bought these lots and created their own businesses. In the early 1920s, this was when it all took place. But moving to the 1930s, things took a twist. In 1934, one night, he was traveling along where is now present-day Deadman's, where it is unknown what startled his horse, but his horse was surprised, jumped up, and he fell off. His wagon carrying a bunch of goods went up in the air, and all his goods went down on him. Later the next day, his family went looking for him, where they found him almost frozen to death, having suffered a light stroke. However, he didn't die from that, and ended up living 3 years later, up until his death in 1937. Before Chris Matley, Lee Vining didn't have the name Lee Vining. It was referred to as Poverty Flat due to its poor soil and farming. Residing next to the Mono Lake, the residents of early Lee Vining named this town Lakeview. However, it didn't get to keep its name, as another town had already taken the name Lakeview when they tried to establish a post office. And even before then, after that, Lee Vining was not 2 words, it was 1 word, Lee Vining. And again, when they tried to establish a post office, they told him, no, that's not going to work. So instead, we now have 2 words. And in the 1900s and 1920s, there were many families, but many dominant families were the Hesses, Matleys, LeBrocs, Curies, and the Donnellys, to name just a few. After his purchase of Lee Vining, like I said, he sold his lots, and many of these lots became the first businesses of Lee Vining, such as this one, the Lee Vining Market, owned by Glenn Matley at the time. In 1927, Anna Curie and Peter Gilly bought lots and started their own businesses, such as Curie's Meat Market and El Mono Hotel. In 1926, the LeBrock Motel was established, and Julio's Cafe and Bodie Mike's Bar and Restaurant were established in the 1930s. Here is a picture of El Mono Motel now in 1951-1952 in the winter. And here is what used to be Bodie Mike's. Back then was the Nevada Restaurant and Club and a small coffee shop on the side. Now we get to our county, Mono County. Officially, on April 24th, 1861, Mono County was officially formed, and its county seat had been established in Aurora. However, just 2 years after its establishment, it ran into a few problems. The first was after a survey had been done on the state lines, it had been found that Aurora was found 3 miles past the state lines, which meant it was not in California. The second was that another developing county, Inyo, had begun taking a huge chunk of Mono County. So now with no county seat and having been reduced in size, they scrambled to find a solution. And in looking for their new county seat, they chose 2 candidates, Monaville and Bridgeport. And the people voted, and luckily, Bridgeport came out on top. Monaville did not win. Speaking of Monaville, it was once a massive boom town in the Mono Basin, with its population reaching around 1,000 residents at one point. It is founded by a man named Cord Nurst from Dogtown. In 1959, he found few veins around Monaville, which led to its massive increase in population and popularity. It was even considered, like I said earlier, for the county seat of Mono County, but unfortunately, it was not chosen. And shortly after this, many people began moving out of Monaville, rather moving to Aurora, the next boomtown. And moving into the early 1900s, it was practically already considered a ghost town. And now we get to Bridgeport. And for the first 30 years of its founding, things were relatively peaceful between the settlers and the Paiutes of the area. Until one day. On May 9th, 1891, it was reported that a Bridgeport Paiute named Big Poker Tom was reported missing. And in his search, people came across him, Akwang Tai. He was a Chinese merchant in Bridgeport. He was one of the last people to have seen Big Poker Tom, as they had gone into a gambling match the night before. And while no one can prove anything that he had actually murdered him, people began to suspect that he had, as people entering his shop could smell something a little suspicious, as they would see the walls and covered in some red liquid. And even then, some people actually lifted up the floorboards and saw there was blood under there too. And once, with enough suspicion, the Paiutes began to suspect that Tai had actually murdered him. And not because he was seen guilty or under suspicion, the police arrested him and sent him to the jail for his own protection, as they didn't know what the Paiutes were capable of. Instead, Tai begged for them for protection, as he knew that if he were let out, the Paiutes would absolutely not hold back against him. However, the police did not care. And on June 9th, 1891, his trial started in Bridgeport Courthouse, where shortly beginning the trial, the Paiutes rushed the courthouse, dragging Tai out. And in broad daylight on Main Street, Tai was brutally dismembered. 20 years later, in March 1911, the Jordan avalanche disaster struck. On the night of March 7th, the power had gone out in Bodie. No one knew why, so Bodie sent out 2 men on skis to the Jordan power plant, where their main source of electricity was. Yet when the men got there was nothing there. It was snow. And then it dawned on him. A massive avalanche coming down Copper Mountain had completely obliterated the cottages and the power plant that had been there. Rushing back to Bodie, they spread the news, to which then 100 men volunteered to rush down the Jordan and try to rescue anyone they could save. While there, 30 men had to be taken away as they fatigued or had fallen sick and couldn't continue. And even then, while they tried to dig out all of the cottages or the power plant, it still snowed heavily on top of them. And there was one sole survivor of this tragedy, Miss Agnes Mason. Out of the 8 people that were stationed around the Jordan power plant, she was the only one that survived. Her story is that while sleeping next to her husband, a massive tree fell onto their cottage, crushing her husband beside her and pinning her leg down. Unable to move, she sat an unbearable 62 hours under the snow before help arrived. And now we transfer to the negative effects of the colonization. From the early colonization in the 1920s, Native people were treated with discrimination and injustice. The federal government, after their land had been taken from them, the Kutsurika people simply could not hunt or gather their resources, as they had all been taken away from them. And now they had become dependent on the settlers, as they needed their jobs, as they simply couldn't get their Pandora moths, or they couldn't get any of the jacktails or any food they wanted, as they were all gone. So now they had to work for their money. And this obviously enraged the Kutarika people, who started forming predatory bands in order to fight the colonizers, which resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. And through their mistreatment, they still advocated for their rights as citizens. Even before any recognition, they weren't considered citizens. However, they were still drafted into World War I. However, the federal government did allow indigenous kids to attend public schools. However, this right wasn't given to everyone until the landmark Supreme Court case of Piper v. Big Pine School District of Inyo County, where they argued that the indigenous people had a right to their education. And fortunately, the California Supreme Court sided with them. And that court case cemented their right to an education. However, during the early 1910s and 20s, the U.S. began taking young indigenous kids from their families and taking them to Indian boarding schools. The whole purpose of this was to eradicate their culture, their language, and their traditions, and replace them with English, American, or Christian beliefs. Here, they forbade them from speaking their native language, shaved their heads, and conditions were horrible. And unfortunately, many kids would pass away in these Indian boarding schools, as they would pass away from malnourishment or from simply being mistreated so much. And some kids were even allowed to go home after a few years, but it was tragic. Many of them didn't know their native language, and they couldn't talk with their families. They remembered nothing. And while all these seem horrible, some people held on to their traditions. Minnie Mike and Carrie Bethel are considered one of the best basket makers of their time in the Mono Basin. Many of their baskets now find their home at the Mono Basin Historical Society Museum, where this summer I even got the chance to handle one of their baskets donated by a local from the area. Many people of their time, too, were excellent basket makers, not just them. Some like Lula and Mildred Hess, who at their time were very controversial for the fact that they had married white men, Gus and Bill Hess. Lula Hess was married to Gus Hess, and Mildred was married to Bill Hess, which at the time was very unpopular, but you gotta think, they were way ahead of their time. With basket making being a big part of their culture, they even held something called Indian Field Days, where they would even portray their culture, their baskets, and these called hupas, where they would hold their babies. And now we switch over to more negative effects. In the early 1900s, a new type of settler made their way into the Mono Basin, the Los Angeles Department of Power and Water, or better known as LADWP. They had begun buying land from the residents of this area and continued through the Great Depression, as many people simply didn't have enough money and they were desperate for any kind of money they could get. And as time went on, they began getting their water rights to all the creeks of the Mono Basin and Mono Lake as well. We're going to first talk about the creeks as well. So there are 5 creeks that feed into the Mono Basin: Mill Creek, Parker, Walker, Rush, and Levining Creek. All of which, except for Mill Creek, were diverted. Mill Creek was never diverted. Instead, its water was used for the Lundy Lake Reservoir, in which now there is a new plan for returning their water, as before there was no plan and Mill Creek would lose a ton of its water. However, now we do have a restoration plan for it. But before we get to that, the 4 creeks that were diverted, Parker, Walker, Levining, and Rush Creek, they were all diverted around the 1940s for their water to support the growing demands of water in Los Angeles. And soon after, creeks began drying up, their vegetation would die off, and overall, things looked horrible. The beauty and the natural world of here would simply die. And without a doubt, the most affected and devastated body of water out of all of this was Mono Lake. Since the 1940s, their streams were diverted and they began to lose water and was draining fast. Diversions were absolutely out of control. 80,000 to 100,000 acre feet were being diverted from the lake each year without stop. The peak diversion was a staggering 156 acre feet. And in the 1970s, the lake had plummeted 45 feet. It seemed that there was nothing anyone could do to save the lake. And that's when we get to David Gaines. In 1976, he was a student from Stanford University, and he traveled with others from UC Davis to visit and study Mono Lake. He and others realized the tragedy would soon unfold if no one were to stop the diversions of Mono Lake. So he, along with his future wife, Sally Gaines, established the Mono Lake Committee in 1978 with the support of many nature organizations. In 1979, the Mono Lake Committee and the National Audubon Society sued LEWP on the grounds of the public trust doctrine, which held that the government had a right to protecting bodies of water for the people. Unfortunately, the California Supreme Court ruled with the Mono Lake Committee and National Audubon Society. And in 1983, they continued. Here we go. In 1983, to bring attention to this issue, they decided to establish the Mono Lake Tufa State Natural Reserve, which was founded to keep the people informed and aware about the Mono Lake situation. And afterwards, in 1984, the Mono Lake Committee, California Trout, and National Audubon Society again sued LEDWP, this time to rescue the 5 creeks that were being diverted. They had sued as they knew there was no water left in any of these creeks, which meant that their vegetation was dead. Their ecosystems had died, and they knew they had to save it. And also, they had violated the fish and game codes, which was huge law breaking. So, what happened? The California Supreme Court ruled in their favor again, and this time forced LEDWP to establish a restoration plan for all the creeks. However, on January 1988, tragedy would strike. David Gaines, his wife and his 2 kids, and a Mono Lake Committee member had gone in their cars. While visibility was low and they couldn't see anything in front of them, a car hit him head on. While Sally Gaines and the 2 kids survived, David Gaines and Mono Lake Committee member Don Oberlin passed away. David Gaines would leave his work and legacy to the Mono Lake Committee to finish. And now, more than ever, did the Mono Lake Committee need the victory to support their cause and to finally rescue Mono Lake. And on September 28th, 1994, Decision 1631 was issued by the State Water Board, which mandated the Mono Lake level be set at 6,392 feet. This work had finally paid off. David Gaines succeeded even after death. They also established Orders 98-5 and 98-7, which forced LEWP to create a restoration plan for the Mono Lake. At the time of this presentation, Mono Lake has not come close to that mandated level. We are still around 10 feet under that mandated level. However, we still have assistance from nature, as the winter of last year helped us gain a monumental 4 feet in height, which seems great, and it is, as now we plead with the LEWP to stop their diversions to let the lake increase and fully recover. As even before this presentation, the Mono Lake Committee had already sent out letters asking for a halt on diversions to let the lake and creeks recover. And here is a video from July this year to August this year. As you can see, the increase of water. So slowly you'll see that there's a bunch of grass here, tufas there, but by the end of the video, most of the grass is gone and the water has completely just made it onto the shores. And now what you used to be able to walk on is now underwater, which is good. And because the video is taking a little long to load. Here. All right, so we're gonna act it out. Basically, water's down here, tufas are up here, grass is right here. And as the month progresses, oh, never mind. Yeah. You can slowly see as you see the water slowly increase as it takes over. And oh no. And slowly see as water keeps rising, slow, but it continues to rise up. And by the end of it, this is what it looks like. A month before it was covered in grass, and now most of the grass is now at least submerged in that water. And now we shift to currently now. Before, in the 1900s, there were actually no other settlers besides white men here, as there were the Hesses, the LeBrocs, and the Curies. And now we've seen a massive change in demographics as we see more Hispanic families migrate to the Mono Basin. Many dominant Hispanic families are the Santillanes and the Romeros, these three of which are one of my good friends. I come from Hispanic descent. My family came here in the early 1990s. My mother and uncle crossed here in 1992 in December, before Christmas. And now here I am, presenting on Latinos. Obviously, you can see I'm very interested in history, and it's something I've been very interested since such a young age. One of my options after college is to become a historian. And as you can see here, the average median pay is around $64,000 with $31 an hour, give or take. I've always been interested in human history or natural history, whether it doesn't really make a difference to me. I love to be working teaching people about history, especially Mono Basin history, like other history that's been overlooked by people. I've had the opportunity to interview David Carl, who gave me very good life advice, just in case things sometimes don't work out.
I think you should continue, even after you are off at college, during your summers, if you're looking for a job to work in the summer, if you do that, look for related work. Get that stuff that's related to your interests and careers. You may not. It's hard to know at this point in your life exactly how things are going to fall out. I started out wanting to be. I didn't start out wanting to be a park ranger. I studied to be a biologist in college, and but then I started working at summer jobs as a seasonal park aide at some state parks in Southern California on the beach, and I was very impressed with the people I saw working there and their professionalism and all of the range of duties they had, and it changed me. And because of doing that work as a seasonal summer work that I needed to survive the rest of the time when I was a student or right after I got out of college, that shaped what I ended up doing and changed it a little bit. It changed it into being this. Still a natural history concern, but being a ranger.
And now my 4-year plans are to attend college. And right now I've applied to all of these colleges. And so far I've been accepted into these 2 and wait on an answer from these 3 UCs. But however, if I do get accepted into UC Davis, all these are out the window and I'm sticking to Davis. Here's my bibliography. Thank you guys so much.
All right, we have about 1 minute before the bell rings, so if someone has a quick question.
Oh my God, it still takes so long.
Please stay seated until the bell rings. I'd appreciate that. And if anyone has a question, that would be great.
Diego, the photo of Rush Creek when it was completely bare, when was that taken?
That was taken around the early 1970s, around that time. I'm not sure exactly of which date, but on where I got that picture was taken roughly around 1970s. Yeah. Any other questions? Too bad. I'm out of here. Boom.